So wanted to talk to you about something, but this picture I took, back when we actually had conferences and went to them and show floors. This is the root of at least some people's interest in software bills and material, where they, quote, are guilty of having using components with known vulnerabilities. But the bottom line of it is that many, have traditionally thought of, they're dealing with their manufacturer. But as you all know, we actually have some supply chain behind that. And when it comes to software, there's very little visibility into that. And so what we want to be able to do is take away the veils of unknownness and uncertainty and really understand what is in the software that we get and use, so that we can both know, well, I'm going to get into the details, but there's a lot of motivations. So I do want to let you all know there's an effort going on in the Department of Commerce's NTIA that for the last 2 years has been focused on this. And it's called their Market Transparency Through Software Bill of Materials. Alan Friedman is the lead of that, and I've been a supporter of that effort, and he actually is involved in this effort I'm going to talk about today, as well as 29 other organizations. But the focus of their effort is that big picture about getting people motivated to want a software bill of materials, understanding what they can do, what they can't do. And that's where I offer, you definitely want to look at what they're doing. They produce some wonderful products from their first phase, and I'm going to talk about the one on the far left, their framing groups, establishing a common software bill of materials work. But there's a lot of good efforts there you all should take advantage of. And what I think of that effort, I think the center of mass of it is about the end users and those who give them software-based things, and getting a dialogue between them about the software that they're getting, what's in it, where it come from, and all kinds of different, sets of questions around that. So the NTIA effort, rightly or wrongly, I say is kind of focused in this orbit. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the people, the ecosystems, the communities that make the software development tools that all those software product offerers and people who are offering products with software use to produce what they give to the end users. So the tool-to-tool SBOM Exchange Standard effort is aimed down here at the bottom layer, but it's meant to enable and make more efficient and effective all the effort that the NTIA is drawing and coordinating and guiding. So who is this community that I'm talking about? Well, obviously it's those who create and build, desktops or development environments. In this day and age, it's also the repositories and repos, whether it be for source code or packages, the whole orchestration community that helps you bring together things and stage it, share it. There's also the whole part of the ecosystem that looks at analyzing software and understanding its composition and the quality and issues with it, as well as those who test software or operate it and manage it and monitor it, stage new releases, the whole continuous integration development community. And then there's all those who want to make sure that you're developing in a way that you don't use software with licenses that put what you're creating at risk, as well as understanding the vulnerabilities in the things you use, where they are, and what you can do to address them. So these are the communities that we were targeting when we started positioning this tool-to-tool SBOM work. So who are those? So we did some work to understand them, figure out who's out there, what's the position, whether they're open source or commercial offerings. And these slides, as Tracy said, will be available. So we have this list of people who are doing the source code and package repositories. In the software composition analysis, this was a partial list. It's actually bigger than this, but this was where we started about 1.5 years ago. And then there's the desktop development environments. And of course, it depends on what kind of development you're doing. The different tool suites and environments for each. And then there's the build and choreographic orchestration type tools. So what I did and my team is we put together a survey and we circulated this with about 50 organizations that do a lot of software development. And we got kind of who are the ones that you use and depend on and we should be talking to when we talk about a software bill of materials. So, from a graphic icon point of view, these were the ones we identified and were able to bring into our community. And so that was the start of what we went forward with. We didn't just do that, though. We also went and looked at the work in the community at large, found this work from the object management group. It's an ongoing set of work looking at the provenance and pedigree and the interesting entwinedness that many have put on those words. And we'll go into how we're using them, but there's definitely a community out there very interested in that and working on how do they share that and convey that kind of information, things we can leverage in what we're doing as a standard. And then there's also in the commercial world, this was from a presentation about 1 year ago, where Uber, who is really software-based, was doing much better before the pandemic, but they very much are worried about the software, and so the whole provenance of their code, where is it coming from, what was the chain of custody of it, is a huge concern for them. So out of all of this, we put together a set of usage scenarios to try to drive and focus the tool-to-tool work. So one of the first usages was, being able to refer to a piece of software when you may be buying it or transferring it or just want to point to it. So that was definitely a key area. We also wanted to understand the history of how it actually was produced, the pedigree. So what compiler options and flags and, was StackGuard used so that, certain kinds of vulnerable executables wouldn't happen. Also wanted to know the provenance. Many people definitely want to understand where did the code come from, who had access to it, could have manipulated it or contributed to it. And that was definitely on our map, as well as integrity, understanding that what somebody provided has not been tampered with and is what was intended. And then a lot of the community, very, very concerned about that the software in their software is there in an appropriate manner and that there isn't going to be damage from someone claiming you use software in an inappropriate way that could, be harmful to your organization. Also, the whole question about vulnerabilities. If there's a vulnerability in something that's in my software, how will I know about that? What do I do about that? And that whole community. And then assurance. This is more of, if a project has been doing things to gain assurance that something is safe, is resilient, secure, how do I, talk about that and link it to maybe that first use case on the left? Then there's this idea that a lot of people now basically get software delivered as a service. They invoke something, and somewhere software does its job and gives an answer or causes something to happen. But what actual software was running when that was invoked? And were there any issues? What was the provenance and pedigree and patch issues and assurance issues with that software when it was invoked? So the idea of getting a bill of material from an API, if you want it, was very interesting to many. And then the last one was the whole software supply chain. If you and your partners have, come up with an approach to delivering software that has the requisite reviews and integrity and checks by tools and people and, testers, how do you know that that actually was done, especially in the continuous development, continuous integration world? So these were our kind of scenarios that we were trying to fulfill. Doesn't mean that each of them would drive something into an SBOM, but rather an SBOM should support and have a proper role in delivering these kinds of capabilities. So what we did next was say, okay, well, what elements could be in an SBOM? And these are the ones we started with. And then what we did is say, well, sometimes the information you need to support a particular use case is not going to be in the SBOM. And so we also wanted to understand what kind of correlated information you may need to actually support those usage scenarios. So what I'm going to walk you through now is just basically the way we started mapping this. And this was how we started the process. So if I'm going to just want to be able to refer to a piece of software, I will definitely need to understand, something about the SBOM itself, but that's kind of to the side. What really you want to know is the supplier, what components are in it, what versions, in some way of us, relating it to the actual executable. The timestamp on the SBOM and how it was created and who the author is something more about managing the SBOMs versus the particular use case. And so you'll see those three in many of these. So if I want to understand the pedigree, I need to know something about how it was created, what was created using what, and what configuration of that tool or approach, or what flags were set and so on. Similarly, provenance, I need to know who created it, what was the path, how did it come to be that it got where it was built into the piece of software you're receiving. Integrity, you really need to understand the same things as when I send it, but now at the far right, you see the SBOM hash and signature. You need some kind of way of conveying the integrity and uncorruptedness of the thing you're looking at. The intellectual property or the licensing, you could either have that embedded, which is where I'm showing you right now, is so that license information could be inside it, or if the repository of licenses kept track of SBOMs that are using it or you refer to it, you could have some correlated external information, or you could have some mixture. The known vulnerabilities, obviously here you're going to be making use of the community information about vulnerable code and versions and the way that's all managed. And so here, you're not really adding anything into the SBOM. It's really about connecting to it. But I did put the notes here, and that idea of notes really has expanded to maybe something about, well, I'm using this component that has a vulnerability, but I'm using it in a way that it's not exploitable in my situation. I'll talk more about that in later slides. Assurance, lots of external information that can be created. And again, you want to link it to an SBOM, but it's not necessarily going to be stored in the SBOM itself. The SBOM of a service, you basically want some ability to keep track of software's bill of material when it gets invoked. So let's say somebody offered their APIs with SBOMs delivered for whatever is running when you invoke it. This would be wonderful for if later you find out you were running vulnerable code, you could figure out when you were running it, what versions, how was it vulnerable, and start tracking down if some attack happened during that window of exposure. In the supply chain here, again, the big part of it is, well, what is the path of processes and activities that should happen? And that's kind of external to an SBOM. But then the SBOM can keep track of, through the provenance and pedigree information, maybe where it came from, who did what on it, so on. So that's a real quick overview of what drove us. And when this was presented last fall, we were able to start an effort in the CISQ and OMG environment that we call the software bill of materials, or tool of tool software bill of materials. The participant list has grown over time, and this is available through the link that's Tracy is offering, I think in the discussion thread. But a lot of different kinds of organizations involved from many different perspectives, and we'll talk a little more about that in a moment. So the other thing we did was we are leveraging NTIA's framing group's output from the first year, where they basically got in and said, well, what is the baseline of components that would be there? So the author, name, supplier component, version, component hash, unique identifier, and relationships. So the unique identifier and relationship you didn't see on my little graphics a moment ago, that's evolved as a key element of this, and we'll show you how that comes into the SBOM work. So we also looked out at what's going on, what efforts are out there that have things we can borrow. I've just walked you through some of the NTIA things that we're borrowing, but also I showed you the provenance and pedigree work from OMG and the CD Foundation, the Linux Foundation's SPDX work. In Toto is a supply chain effort. Cyclone DX is something that very used in the vulnerability space and producing inventory of software, including your software. All of these people from these groups are part of this community that is working the tool-to-tool software bill of materials. So on that website, there's a link to our Google Drive. This is what it looks like at the high level. Just going to walk through a couple parts of this. Basically, there's a white paper that captures a lot of what I've walked through up until this point. It was the jumping off point. We have draft specs and the usage scenarios where we explored even further. We also have a draft model that's been evolving over time. If you want to join us, there's meeting recordings to get up to speed. The whole list of members details are also in this drive. And what I wanted to focus on now is talk to you about the subgroups. So we basically have a main meeting on Wednesdays, and then we have 3 groups that are actively meeting: core on Tuesdays, integrity on Mondays, and defects on Thursdays. So there's 4 hours of meetings if you want the whole set of options, very active. And this is the drive for that core group. And so here you can see our discussions at the bottom. You can see the different elements and our discussions about each of them. And that was then rolled up into an actual model, which I'm about to show you. And, we're just getting to the point of reviewing that model, comparing it to other efforts to see if there are things that need to be added or removed. And many of the efforts that I showed in the previous slide are actually evolving themselves as they see interesting new techniques and approaches from this effort. So I think you're going to see a convergence around things in the coming months and year, where some of the difference in approaches in the different offerings become less and less. So here's an eyeful, but this is basically where we're at now. I'm not going to go into gory detail, but if you're a modeler, you'll note that this is a fairly simple, and I'll use the word elegant model. There's not a lot of overloading or edge cases here. The model, though, can be serialized into different, more efficient ways if you bring it into XML or JSON or other forms. The other thing to note here is there's actually 2 parts to this model. The very bottom says package software, whereas the top says package core. So one of the things we found was by bringing the expansion of artifacts out as a separate part, we actually have a core model that could, for instance, support a hardware bill of materials. And that's something several of those involved in the community have been very active and interested in, is because their products don't just ship as a software item. It's usually software in a piece of hardware. And so they're looking as bill of material to be more integrated across those aspects. So the other part of this is that this model can easily convert into an RDF OWL so that you can actually do some more straightforward integration of this kind of software insight and hardware insight into other types of knowledge. And so the whole approach is meant to be useful to enterprises as well as friendly to tool developers and people who just want to have their tool do the job and generate SBOM appropriate information on the side. Another example of how we're leveraging these different efforts is that some of the specifics about what kind of hash algorithms we can actually encode is coming from both CycloneDX and SPDX, whereas the file package type, is coming from Cyclone and some other source. But we also have file type, and there we're leveraging a couple different groups' efforts of what are the file types you may want to convey. We have some other things we're working at. I talked about software as a service, so we've got a placeholder to start elaborating that. But we've also lately been talking about if we're conveying information about a defect and we're just doing it by this component is used by my software, And so that's just saying that the code was placed inside your code. It doesn't mean you used it in a way that would make the exploit actionable. So we're also looking at the idea of how could we track or capture the API used, and so that you would know or be able to tell if you actually invoked it in a way that would make it exploitable. And the thinking right now is that that would not necessarily be something you do as you build software, but if the software you created has a vulnerability reported on one of the components you used, maybe you would do a retrospective analysis to understand which of the APIs you used and then express that to your customers saying, hey, I know there's a reported, for instance, CVE on this component, but I used it this way, it's not exploitable, and so you don't need to wait for a patch from me. You can actually use it, continue to use it in a safe and secure and reliable manner. So that's a kind of a rundown of the details. Very good source of minutes in our activities within the communities, within those different groups, all available up on the Google Drive. And so I'd like to just, kind of offer that what we're really doing here is we're offering not only the software, but the hardware management community. And, the SBOM work is going to have a core bill of materials capability. It's going to have this software bill of materials kind of as a profile on top, so that there'll be one spec, but you can use different parts of it. And those other parts are to support licensing, pedigree, provenance, maybe a hardware bill of materials, or some other set of profiles. And so that's where we're aiming for. We started out back in March socializing this. We had the white paper that we presented in a 3-day workshop back in last September. We've been prototyping the format. We think we're going to have a RFC to submit in December, worst case March, and then move forward from there to finalization a little later, and then have it approved in either June or September, where we can then move it on to fast track into ISO. These are the organizations currently on the CISQ SBOM homepage. There's a couple others that don't have logos. They're just people involved. But I offer to any of you interested, we'd like your insights, your comments, your suggestions. We really want this to be a best of breed approach to the community's efforts, and not reinvent wheels if the wheels are available and fit where we're trying to go. And with that, I'm at questions with way too much time left. Hopefully we have some questions. If not, Bill, I'm sure you can throw a couple at me.
Yeah, and thanks, Bob. I'm back. Tracy and Bill's on as well, Dr. Bill Curtis. So if folks have questions, you can enter them in the questions box. Also, go ahead if you'd like, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. We do have Shelley. Let me unmute you. Oh, it's funny, I'm trying to unmute you, but it says self-muted. But Shelley, if you want to try unmuting.
My apologies. My apologies, but thank you. I did not realize I'm going to put my hand down as well. I would like to thank MITRE Corporation for putting this on. And my question, excuse me, my name is Shelley Waite from Waite SLTS. provide cybersecurity and artificial intelligence services. My question is in regards to businesses that are doing business with the government, and they have to be compliant with the DFARS regulations. How is this going to impact the third party compliance standards as it relates to businesses doing business with the government? Thank you.
Good question, Shelley. I'm hoping what the answer will be, it's going to be another tool, and it's going to offer, basically a way of illuminating, your software supply chain and who's involved. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not like every compiler around will magically have this baked in and everybody's going to, recreate all their codes and the day after. And that's why you saw on the companies involved, we had a lot of the software composition and analysis vendors, because we want their job today is to kind of recreate a bill of materials based on what's there versus have a bill of materials created when you build the software. And so we want to make sure that this structure is one that they could use so that we can over time transition. So I think what you'll see is as this becomes a credible and useful capability in the market, you'll start to see policy, you'll start to see interest in, well, can you deliver a bill of material? And then as that utility shows its benefit, you'll start seeing leaning more and more towards requiring it. And eventually, I think, if I said, let's just take a real long step, 10 years down the road, I would not be surprised if the DFARS required anyone delivering software to the federal space to include a bill of materials, not necessarily a public bill of materials. That's one of the things that a lot of people get into is, well, a bill of materials means I'm going to make all my ingredient lists known to everyone. No, that just because you have a bill of materials doesn't mean you need to share it with everyone. It's just a matter of, if you're going to talk to me, I prefer you talk in English, because unfortunately, that's the only language I'm good at. So if you're going to convey a bill of materials, it'd be nice if you use a standard way, but it doesn't mean you have to put it out on a public accessible place. It could be you just give it to your customer and you use the same kinds of integrity, security, privacy mechanisms you use for anything that's privileged that you share with a customer. So hopefully that addressed your question, Shelley.
It did, and of course it created other questions like the standards of when you're getting that information from your vendors or your suppliers, the standard to get that information, because I would think that the questions from each would vary from each company, but the bottom line would be the same. So that would be interesting, developing the standard for that. And I apologize, I just stumbled across the website today. When can I look forward to the next meeting about this?
There's a meeting at 3 o'clock today. If you send me a link and I get off this, I can invite you to it. But we meet at around, well, the afternoons of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, depending on which group you want to engage in. Today's, we're going to have a second of what we call the core meeting. So we're going to be reviewing the model and talking about how we actually can serialize it to support different needs of different communities. but still have it be the same core model. Usually on Wednesdays is when we have our main group meeting, but the core team, which met yesterday, was hot on some topics. And so we're reusing today's. We also have a defects group meeting Thursday, and then integrity next Monday.
Roger. I look forward. I put my email address in the box, and I look forward to more discussions. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'll get that over to you, Bob.
Thanks.
And then a question in the chat box, and Alexander, I can unmute you too if you'd like to chime in, but I'll read this as well. As the tool-to-tool model is nearing completion and down the road ISO endorsement, is there going to be a reference implementation tool from CISQ/CD Foundation SBOM group? Reference.
We think there's going to be several reference implementations, not necessarily, authored by CISQ, but rather by the participants. So one thing you'll notice if you go to the web page is there's several Microsoft entries. That's because their different product teams, different offering groups are each looking at how they would use this. And so they're going to be prototyping. The Intoto team has tools. The Linux Foundation group has tools. So many of them are looking at, how they can modify tools, not even starting from scratch to use this standard. And in fact, the meeting yesterday with the core group was working through, okay, we have this model. What would it look like as an actual piece of, describing an actual container type software environment from one of the colleague working from GitHub. And so we're trying to, it's one thing to talk about a UML model. It's totally another to see what it would look like as JSON or as XML. What would the developer actually see? And we can serialize that model several different ways, and so that's where we're exploring to make sure each of our participants understand the options that will be available, and then how we want to capture that and convey that in the actual standard with examples. So we expect many pieces of running code to be available that are, they'll be basically, trying out our draft as we put the RFC out. And so part of what we'll do in the interim waiting for community feedback is listen to our own feedback as, teams report on, difficulties they had or ambiguities, from our own internal use of tools and building of tools.
All right. And David Eddy has a question, then Bill Dickinson. David, if you're there, you can.
I'm here.
Great.
Bob,
I recognize that voice.
the inevitable question. Do you want to ask it yourself? Or do you want me to ask it?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah. I looked at the membership list, participant list. Are there any considerations of mainframe software that often is basically constructed inside companies with their own?
I would offer that please reach out to your customers and ask them to join us. Okay. It's a volunteer effort, and while we can try to broaden ourselves to what we think should be addressed, having people who really work in the different areas is the best way to, rather than trying to guess what you'd want from a bill of materials in a mainframe type of context. But we're trying to support bill of materials in whatever creation, utilization, operational environments people are willing to help us capture.
Good enough. Thank you.
Let's see. And Bill Dickinson, if you want to unmute, I have freed you. There you go.
Sure. This is Bill Dickinson from VeraPrism. How do you see it looks like you've got a good representation of companies involved in this, but there are an awful lot of packages that are popping up from non-commercial companies, certainly a fair number of open source freeware things. How do you see getting them engaged?
So you may not have noticed it, but Apache Foundation and the Linux Foundation are key members of this. And so we're hoping through them, we will be heavily involved in the open source community and the tooling and mechanisms that they have. So that's definitely a great question, and one we hope we've addressed. If you have suggestions on others to get involved, we're very welcoming and open, and love to get their perspective and whatever experience they've had that can help us get to where we're trying to get to.
Yeah. It would seem at very least we should be offering them some kind of a, I'll call it starter package or starter header that they could start including to get them used to this thought early, because this is going to be a long haul otherwise.
Well, the way we're hoping is that, this will get implemented in development tools, and it'll just start showing up as an optional or maybe mandatory, who knows, depends on the tool and the ecosystem of players they're involved in. But, if I'm building software, we're hoping it's not going to be a radical change to, using those development tools, but rather it's going to be now, if their customer says, oh, I need a bill of materials, it's not going to be a huge lift for someone to, turn on those options or make use of that and then, maybe directly convey it, or, maybe change some options because they don't want to, produce the whole pedigree and they only want to give, the component minimal type of information. But I hear what you're saying, and we're definitely going to hopefully have a good way of introducing this to people. And I would say that, the work being done in NTIA to socialize and talk about this whole area is one that I'm hoping, as we get closer and closer to something that is ready to be used, we can use some of their outreach and engagement opportunities as well.
Thank you.
And we have a question from Hake. And I'm going to go ahead actually at this point and unmute everybody. So, Hake, you're next if you're on.
Do you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask if you have considered the possibility to collect the SBOM from already compiled binary.
So that's hopefully where some of the software composition analysis vendors and offerings are going to address, where they have been pursuing that area. So we're hoping that the SBOM structure that we're capturing in the standard would be a way for them to convey what they found, as well as to acknowledge, what technique they used, or, that's one of the areas we haven't come to grounds yet. Is, if you're getting an SBOM, one of the things you would want to know is, well, how was this populated? Was it populated by the author of the software as they built it, or was it populated by someone else as a third party? And was that based on looking at the source code, or was that something looking at binaries or tracking the open source project, or, you know, so that way you can judge for yourself how much accuracy you think this BOM has. But another part of that would be, maybe I'm doing it as an auditor, right? Somebody gave me a BOM, but I'd like to validate that it looks reasonable. So, but from your question, we definitely want to be open to that kind of, I only have the binary. We're not trying to explore or expand that capability, but we want to be able to capture and convey whatever they can record. And so if there are things that the BOM doesn't capture currently that would be found from those, we're definitely interested in talking about it.
Really great job. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I did just paste into the chat box. Next Tuesday, October 13th, CISQ is hosting the Cyber Resilience Summit. This is an event we do every year in the DC area, usually at the Army Navy Club in Arlington. And this year it'll be online. So the Cyber Resilience Summit's next Tuesday, October 13th. And everyone's invited. You know, registration is free this year with this being online. And both Bob and Dr. Alan Friedman, who's on from NTIA, will be talking about SBOM and introducing this spec, you know, to the government IT community. CISQ has also been working on an automated source code data protection measure, and we'll talk about that following a panel discussion on cybersecurity maturity model certification, CMMC. So for those interested, there's a link. You can check it out and register over the next couple days. So I think one more question did just come in asking about SBOM. Is this industry specific?
Oh, definitely not. The idea here is that this is, you know, based on the tools that create software, not based on what kind of software you're creating. Now, you may, for instance, if you're very worried about, you know, the behavior of your software, you may expect and require the tools to use the pedigree option within the spec, which would capture, you know, what tools were used to create it, what options were used, and so on. Whereas someone in another domain who wasn't so interested or concerned about that may be more laissez-faire about that. So you can use the different aspects or profiles of the SBOM depending on your, you know, sensitivity to the kinds of information or knowledge it can offer you. But I don't believe there's anything specific about the standard that, you know, is aimed at any particular industry or, you know, would be avoided by any particular industry.
Mm-hmm.
Where can I find the address of Google Drive? What you mentioned.
If you go, yeah, if you go to the CISQ web page about this, which is, if you go to the main page over on active projects, there's a pull down and SBOM is one of them. At the very bottom of that page, are the Google Drive, the email archive, as well as I think, well, contact me if you want to join. And also, I think there's another drive where, as the spec gets a little more mature, we're going to be doing versioning, and we'll be checking in. And I think, yeah, it's a GitHub link.
Okay, I found it.
So that's all at the bottom of that page.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, if you have any follow-on questions, feel free to email us. You could send them to me, Tracy at omg.org, or to Bob and Dr. Bill Curtis. And we're going to capture recording from today and make this available on demand. So we'll send you a link to this. And don't forget to grab a copy of the slides if you'd like. It's in the handouts tab. But thank you, Bob. This was great. Looking forward to next week as well at the Cyber Summit. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.